All right, welcome everybody. My name is Mike Miller. I'm the Associate AD for Marketing Strategies and Fan Engagement. We welcome you to this Columbia Football Town Hall. I'd like to introduce our host this evening, who is the voice of Columbia Football, host of the New York Giants pregame radio, and Sirius XM Sports Talk on Mad Dog Radio, Lance Meadow, and the Patricia and Shepard Alexander head coach of football, Al Bagnoli. So we've had a great response from this. This will provide some people with an insight on a few things going on with Columbia football. We're not going to delay any longer. I'm going to take myself off of this right now and let Lance and Coach Bagnoli get to it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike. Coach, first of all,
Thanks,
it's
Mike.
good to see you from afar. Something tells me you've become somewhat of an expert of Zoom over the last few weeks, given this is a piece of technology that you've been relying on for the sake of communication. First of all, I hope you and yours are safe and healthy under the circumstances. And thanks so much for joining us here today. With respect to the timeline, let's start there, Coach.
No, it's my pleasure. And
going back to mid-March.
Yeah. Again, when all this occurred, you mean? Is that
correct? In terms of where you were and what you learned. It's been an interesting 6 weeks for everybody. Right? Yeah, it's been an interesting 6 weeks. I think everybody kind of saw the storm clouds coming, probably latter part of February into the very early part of March. I think once the World Health Organization declared that it is officially a pandemic, I think that kind of shed new light on everything. And I think in very rapid fashion, everything just went 100 miles an hour with decisions to close down sports and to close down major events, close down schools, the social distance, and all the things that we now have 6 weeks later. So I'm not sure any of us were totally prepared, because I think we were all hoping for the best, and maybe this was more of an overseas virus, but obviously it's hit the U.S. very hard. It's something that we have to take and certainly make sure that we adhere to all the health policies, and something that we're going to have to be very cognizant of moving forward in our decision to re-engage with our student athletes. So they wound up extending spring break, and then it was a matter of organizing everyone to communicate remotely and also for the student athletes to learn remotely. How did that go about, the coordination of all that, before you really went full go?
Yeah, I mean, our kids, and again, kudos to them and kudos to our people on campus, our administrative people. They all got caught in a scenario where they had to vacate their dorm rooms, and they had to do it within a very tight 3-day window, and very few were anywhere near campus. They were not advised to come back to New York City or come back to Columbia's campus following spring break. So it became a lot of remote contact to get storage companies involved to come in here, to get teammates who lived close and were able to help move. But it was really a team effort. So kudos to our kids who had to scramble in a very tight window. Kudos to our administrative people on campus, as well as in the football office, to just try to get this thing organized, just because of the window being relatively tight with just 2-3 days to get this all done.
Coaching is such a big part of routine, right? You have everything mapped out, everything scheduled to a T. I can only imagine what you had planned out for the spring. So from a coaching perspective, how much did you really have to change your mindset in terms of going about navigating this time?
Yeah, I think once it became evident that we were not going to have access to our kids, we had to come up with a plan, a blueprint. And, we all spent a tremendous amount of time with myself and the staff, included the strength coaches in this as well,
But the first thing we had to establish was a routine. And it started off with a routine for our coaches. And again, our coaches, pretty much have a very set timetable. We come in the morning, first thing we do is meet as a staff. We kind of organize how the day's going to go, review any issues, and then we kind of break up into either offense and defense and work on the football side of things. And then we transition to the recruitment aspect of things. And so my first task was trying to establish a routine. And so before we could ever establish a routine for our players, we had to get into a routine and a schedule for our coaches. And it becomes a little bit more daunting just because when you're at a remote, and today was the perfect example, 3 of our offensive coaches have young kids. And so when you're trying to hold meetings from off-site facilities and you're trying to do it via Zoom from everybody's home, obviously, there's other things that we never had to worry about in terms of the office. So, it's not unusual to see the kids jump into the Zoom picture to say hello or just to see what we're doing. And that's all great. That's awesome. That's one of the, positive points is that everybody's getting to see their families a lot more than historically they can do. So there's just, again, recognize that we're in uncharted territories, unprecedented times, but we had to get into a schedule. So our schedule went, we meet every morning via teleconference. Our coaches positionally will Zoom their positions twice a week. So they have access to the latest on what's going on with the notebook. Our coaches and I Zoom twice a week in terms of upgrades and what we're trying to do from a schematic viewpoint, both offensively and defensively. And then we always have, small group interaction. It could be a telephone call, it could be Zoom, it could be a Skype that we do on a daily basis as well. So we have a pretty set schedule now that we've been on. And then again, the next part of it, once we had the coaches on the schedule, was just making sure that our kids were also on a schedule. And then we had to bring in our strength people, and our strength coaches headed up by Bob Gilmartin, and his staff did an awesome job with putting together some programs. And when you put together off-season programs in today's day and age, given the COVID-19 climate, you had to encompass a lot of more variables than you've ever had. So we had to come up with a program that had kids that could work out with zero access to facilities because all the health clubs, the high school gyms, et cetera, were closed. We had to get programs that really kids who had partial access, could have maybe a bench and some dumbbells, but didn't have a squat rack, for example, and what they can do. And then we also had, put together programs that would encompass people who had full access. They had kind of a gym, whether it's in their garage or out in the barn in some cases. So then we had to have some outreach to our kids to just get an appraisal of, okay, so what exactly do you have there? And then we had to put the creative juices to work. And, you've seen some videos now of some, makeshift squat racks from some kids, or you've seen videos of kids using 5-pound water jugs, to have videos of kids pushing cars, in lieu of sleds, for example. And so we had to get the kids now on the schedule as well. And so recently there's been an increase in our ability to spend time with them, even on a virtual basis, from 3 to 6 hours. So that's been nice to be able to have additional more time with them, both on a schematic viewpoint. We've also had our strength coach have a Zoom team meeting just to make sure that, he was aware of any issues, not to necessarily do or look at any programs, but just to kind of have some outreach. So it's been interesting, but you're right in your very first statement, Lance, that it was critical that both the staff and our players get back into some kind of routine.
Before we move on to our next stage here, Coach, is it fair to say with your staff and their kids interacting so much, has your offense and defensive staff grown starting up next season? You may have some new assistants, I'm assuming now.
Yeah, sure. We certainly have more input from various people, and again, it's all good, and I fully recognize the issues that you see nowadays that everybody's confronting who have children that are school age. That there is no school, and everybody's working remotely, and you don't have access to nannies or babysitters because the shelter-in-place hudders. And so, everybody's kind of taking turns, trying to do some work and taking turns trying to watch the kids. So I fully recognize it. I see it with my own family, and it's not an issue, but it's something that we've never really had to deal with.
It is uncharted territory, as you noted, and we will certainly get more into the logistics between you and the coaching staff in a little bit. But right now, let's bring in a member of your team, one of your players, and that is safety Ben Mathiasmeier, who now comes in to join us here on our football town hall discussion. Ben, glad to have you aboard. I hope you and your family are safe and healthy. How's everything on your end? Ben, I think maybe your mic may be muted, so I think maybe you got to unmute yourself. There we go.
That better?
That is better. Now loud and clear.
Now we see you.
Yeah. Everything's good on my side. I'm currently in Houston, Texas, back in my hometown. Just adapting to the environment. I mean, it's changed a lot in the past couple of weeks, but going on last week of classes, full week, and then a little week break before finals. And still working out, trying to stay on schedule and keep everyone accountable, the rest of the players as well. So
a balancing act, certainly, as you just laid out. Now, I was talking with Coach earlier. He had to make the adjustment from a football logistics standpoint. You not only had to make the football logistic adjustment, but you also had to adjust as a student. So let's start there, Ben. What is it like moving from the dormitory atmosphere back home and trying to take care of your academic responsibilities?
It's a little bit different, everything being online, but I feel like a lot of the football guys, we have such great discipline that as long as you just tune in and take your notes and go to class at the right time and still get your workout in and follow the schedule that the strength coaches put together, everything's been going pretty smoothly for me. The only big difference is not just being able to have that face-to-face with all the teammates is what I really miss the most. But school-wise, everything's been going pretty smoothly. We have a gap week here, and then we have finals. Then it'll already be going on to looking at more summer workouts. So
you just mentioned the lack of that face-to-face interaction, and anybody who is in sports knows building chemistry starts also in the off season. So how much has the technological advances, such as what we're using right now, the Zoom, the phone technology, helped you stay in contact with those teammates so you can still build that chemistry?
Yeah, it like Coach Bagnoli touched on a little bit earlier. I meet with the safeties, defensive back group every Tuesday and Thursday for an hour. So what we would be doing in spring ball, we're still getting in what we need to know on the field through more of a intellectual aspect rather than playing. So I still get to see all 9 of my defensive backs every week, twice a week. I may not be able to get to see the whole entire team, but I get to see my group, and then a lot of the leaders of the group come together and we get to discuss, I guess, how each group is developing and growing, even in these times where we might not necessarily get that face-to-face contact.
And how much does that help in terms of the mental give and take that you have with your teammates, whether it's going over plays, talking about scheme, and so forth?
Oh, it's huge, especially for the younger players. I mean, we got almost at every position coming back guys that have experience, but we still need to have a 2 deep that's going to be ready to play at all times. So I feel like having those meetings, getting the younger guys that may necessarily not had a spring ball before, they still get that mental aspect and can grow and learn and become better players, even if they're not getting that on the field experience. So I think it's been great.
You just alluded to, Ben, the fact that you're clearly one of the veteran leaders on this team. I mean, you've been through the grind of the offseason each and every single year. For some of the younger guys on the team who are still getting adjusted to life as a college football player, but now also really have had things thrown a curveball towards them because of the current environment, how do you manage that to make sure that they're staying on top of the things and responsibilities that they need to in terms of the adjustment?
Right. I think one thing a lot of the leaders on the team did is we put together and made sure every position group had a guy that was reaching out to their specific group, getting their weights like we normally do every Tuesday, and making sure everyone's accountable to what they're doing. Then also at the same time, when the meetings come around, if anything needs to be said or added on to what the coaches say, you add on what you need to say to hopefully give the younger guys more insight into what you see as more of a veteran player and what you see on the field come game time on Saturdays. But I think everyone's extremely excited and optimistic. I mean, everyone, at least for me, especially, I have that September 19th date in my mind going against Lehigh. So I'm optimistic. Everyone's optimistic about playing, and we're ready to go. It's just a matter of fact of time and just working these next couple of months up to that point.
Well, speaking of work, the spring season is critical for any football player just to gear up and get ready for the upcoming season. Missing out on the on-field work, what is the biggest challenge in terms of not having that at your disposal this offseason?
I think if the biggest thing I can think of is team chemistry. I mean, football is such a team sport. There's 11 guys on the field at all times. So, I mean, you can do a lot of individual drills to improve your own craft, but it's something about playing with all the guys and feeling out the nature of, different players and becoming a better unit, whether it's offense, defense, or special teams. So I think chemistry is the biggest thing that we'll miss out on, but I can promise you all the guys are putting in their individual work and come back during fall camp. The chemistry will come just playing football together.
Well, we are certainly all looking forward to that. I could tell you personally, I'm looking forward to perhaps another walk-off interception from you, Ben,
Right.
as you did against Harvard this past season. Huge victory, all Ivy honorable selection. Congrats on a successful junior campaign. Thanks for joining us, Ben, and look forward to chatting you once the next season starts up. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me, Lance.
See you, Ben.
Line. See you, Coach.
Okay.
All right, that is Ben Mathiasmeier, safety, joining in on the conversation to provide the student-athlete perspective of the adjustment as we bring back in head coach Al Bagnoli. And, Coach, earlier you were talking about the coordination with your coaching staff and the adjustment you had to make.
Mm-hmm.
From a smooth transition, I mean, how much are you finding that the technology still allows you to have that interaction and still coordinate what you need to get done with your respective coaches?
Yeah, I mean, thank God we have the technology these days that we had. If this happened 20 years ago, I think we'd be in a totally different world. So, that's been helpful. Nothing replaces the interaction. We had a tremendous amount of interaction with our kids, whether, it was coming into the weight room, whether it was coming into a positional meeting, whether it was coming in for spring ball practice. And that's the thing I think everybody misses, and that's what Ben alluded to. It's just the physical interaction that we're so used to having, has been removed. And this certainly beats not having any interaction. So it's better than nothing, but I think to a person, that's what everybody speaks of, missing that ability to see someone on a very regular basis, to check in on them and just make sure that everything is good.
When you have the positional meetings with their coaches and the groups of student athletes, what exactly is the goal to get out of those type of meetings without the on-field work thus far this offseason?
Yeah, I think, we wanted to present the playbook on both sides and kind of go through it, very, very thoroughly, and also accompany that with some film. And so whether it's cut-ups of positional drills that kids can do, or it's cut-ups of certain defensive schematics, or it's cut-ups of opponents, but it's just to give them a very thorough understanding of the playbook, and then introduce, because the spring time is very big for tweaking things, just kind of introduce to them, any small tweaks you may be making offensively or defensively in terms of potential changes, and then just try to give them some visual looks at what those changes may entail. And so it's just to try to kind of introduce things, even though in Ben's case, he's been through it 7 times, but just kind of reintroduce them, kind of get the foundation set, and then just make any small tweaks moving forward.
in terms of everybody having a different setup, obviously in their own home, some have phones, some have computers, everybody relies on technology differently. How did you go about navigating that? I mean, simple things as Wi-Fi speed or all of those other things that are necessary to accommodate that.
Yeah, things that you never think of. And again, we've had to have kids that we were trying to Zoom in because they've had spotty, Wi-Fi signal, go to an aunt for those 2 meetings, or, go to a neighbor's or do something. So it's presented some challenges that, none of us potentially had predicted. So you're absolutely right. And some people feel comfortable, with a computer. Some people feel comfortable with a phone or an iPad. It just varies with each kid, and they all have different access to different technology. So, we've had to try to merge all those different issues together to make this thing as seamless as possible. And I give our kids a lot of credit because they found a way to get things done. I think one of the great lessons you learn is that, if you look for reasons not to do things or not to overcome hurdles, they're readily found, and it's probably as true today as it's ever been. But let's look for reasons to get things done. Let's find ways to get things done. And I think that's been the message from everybody, from me, from our coaches, from our strength people, and again, just understand that we're still here, whether it's me, whether it's our assistant coaches, whether it's our strength coach, whether it's our student enhancement services, whether it's our administrative group. We're still here. We're still here to help you. We're still here to assist. And let's make the situation the very best it could be. And I think our kids are doing a good job with that.
Well, and I think what you just alluded to, Coach, is a big part of sports is adversity and how players deal with that. And this is, to me, a new form of adversity. Normally, you're seeing how these student athletes handle adversity on the field. I would think this is another way for you to learn about your coaching staff as well as your team and how they handle the current environment.
Well, there's no question. And the leadership that you have with your players. Yeah. And, fortunately, we had a leadership council that's been established long before this hit. And they've done a really good job under, Coach DeRazio's tutelage of reaching out positionally. So there's a leadership person on each position that kind of represents that group. And then this, the person that, they would go to if they have any issues or anything that they need to discuss. But, that group becomes critical now because, again, they become the conduit from the coaches, from the positional coaches, head coaches, strength coaches, to themselves, conversely to the teammates, and then obviously to the entire team. So Ben is part of that leadership council, which is great. But we have, I believe, 9 others with him positionally, which is great. So they've done an awesome job.
Our audience has submitted a number of questions, Coach, so let's get to some of those subjects. And this was a question submitted from the audience. How is recruiting being impacted by this pandemic with no home or campus visits? And what challenges is this presenting? How has the staff adapted as a result?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously radically different. If you can just go back to previous years, now we would just be finishing up spring ball. We would be in exit interviews. Spring ball was a great forum to have all kinds of visitors come in on unofficial visits. So it's certainly a time where they can come down and spend time with coaches, look at facilities, watch practice, do the things that, I think become vital. So we didn't have that. We were not able to have any junior days, which is an invite to the kids who are currently juniors heading into their senior year, because we weren't able to have any mass gatherings. So we didn't get those. We would transition to our coaches going out in spring recruiting. So now you have a time where the coaches would leave and they would visit their recruiting areas, just check all the players within a certain geographic area, could be Florida, California, Texas, wherever, and just qualify and try to quantify the kids that we have, talk to coaches and everything else. And so you've had all this foot traffic that we don't have anymore. And the other final piece was, as we transition into June, our coaches would go to other institutions who are also running
one-day evaluation camps. And it'll give us a great day to kind of evaluate kids, say, at Northwestern who attend that camp, generally Midwestern kids, or kids who attend the Duke camp and now the Southern kids, or kids who, from the West Coast who attend the Stanford camp. And again, it's another way where you can continue to build relationships with potential student-athlete recruits that you no longer have. So you're kind of missing those pieces, much like you're missing with your team. And so basically what we've had to rely on now is spending a considerable amount of time, trying to really qualify the student athlete in question now to the best degree we can in terms of getting the heights, the weights, the testing numbers, getting an accurate academic profile, which sounds easy, but again, given schools are closed, it's not as easily without having guidance counselors available, et cetera, et cetera. And then trying to project the future, because one of the byproducts of this thing is the ACT, SAT testing sites have already closed testing through June.
Yeah.
So that June 3rd had already been closed. And so now we're getting incomplete data with our potential recruits. So by now, most of the kids would have taken an ACT and SAT at least once and probably have signed up to take the May and the June test. And so coming into our camps, because again, we've had to cancel all of our summer camps, those 7 opportunities. But by the time they got to camps, we would have a pretty good idea of where they were academically, because we had the end of the junior year transcript, and then we had ability to access 2 or 3 potential ACT, SAT scores. So we kind of knew were these kids in the correct academic area, in the correct academic band, that they have the correct academic index number that we needed. And so a lot of the puzzle is now missing. And so we're now having to make potential offers, and this is based on the guidance of our admissions people, and is based on academic rigor and making sure that the kids continue to take those accelerated courses, those AP courses,
Yep.
honors courses, and just continue to challenge themselves and really try to do it certainly a little bit more blindly than we've done, because we don't have access to the ACT or the SAT. And then to further complicate it, we can't qualify the accuracy of the information we have. And what I mean by that is you get a defensive lineman who lists himself at 6'3", 240 pounds. Well, when you see him in person, is he actually 6'3", or is he 6 foot 1.5 inches, which typically becomes the case. So it's been a lot more challenging to just try to qualify kids on both a size, physical level, as well as the academic parameters that we have to recruit by. So it's been interesting.
It certainly sounds like it based on your description. No disagreement there. All right, here is another question submitted from our audience. When will the current recruiting class be announced? Is it on the same timeline, or will things be delayed as a result of what you just went through?
No, it should be on the same timeline. I think everybody has until the 1st of May to deposit. And we as a league choose to use that date to then release everything. All of our kids have already deposited. So for the Columbia incoming class, short of a transfer who's in the middle of going through the process, all those kids have already deposited. So they're all set. The league has agreed to release it anytime after May 1st, because that is the deadline from an admission standard that kids have to respond. So we don't want to send it out without making sure we gave every kid every opportunity to respond, moving forward. So it should not have an impact in terms of the recruiting list. It'll be out sometime that first week in May.
We will get to a few more questions submitted from the audience in a little bit. I want to get back to what you were tapping into earlier, Coach, in terms of trying to keep your players in condition for the upcoming season in terms of the conditioning aspect, because Normally, you have your own facility. They can work out. They come and go.
Sure.
Now you're at the mercy of whatever's lying around in their houses, or do they have access to facilities? So how did the coordination go about with respect to that, in addition to what you already have to take on with respect to setting up meetings?
And again, it became, an extensive series of meetings with our strength coaches. And then we had to kind of go through phases. So, one of the phases that we were always trying to go through and finish up on was the absolute strength portion of the workout. So where it's really 80% driven to improve strength, it's 20% cardio at that point. And then you transition from there and you gradually, when you feel comfortable with the absolute strength numbers, then you gradually now increase the cardio as the year progresses, because eventually you have to get into football shape.
Yeah.
So now we're in the transition stage of, going from absolute power and strength to try to be a little bit more balanced between the cardio, the football drill aspect of it, the movements involved in a football game, in a football field, both positionally, as well as individually. So which I think makes sense. So we've had to transition workouts. And again, our strength people have done an awesome job of now continually and update that program to just reflect a little bit more cardio, reflect a little bit less in terms of the strength, because very few kids have full access to squat racks, benches, and everything that you normally would have. So you have to transition from one to the other. But again, this is a problem that everybody is facing. So you could be at Alabama and your kids are home, and you certainly, have no guarantee they have access to any more than our kids have. So our coaches have done a tremendous job of just trying to be as flexible as they can, trying to implement all different types of approaches and workouts and protocols. The strength coaches have gotten together numerous times as an association to talk about best practices and what people are doing, and what can we steal, and what can we use, and what's applicable to our kids. And overall, I think we've done a good job of providing our kids with the best information, the best protocols, and the best case scenario available given the times.
Creativity is a word that certainly comes to
creativity
mind.
is huge. Creativity is huge. Yeah, it's huge.
Because you have to adapt to the current climate.
Yeah.
And the other aspect of this, Coach, is also the academic requirements, obviously, for your players. They still have to take care of their coursework and so forth. So how do you manage to navigate that to make sure that they still have the availability and ability to take care of their coursework in conjunction with what you need to take care of from a football standpoint?
Yeah, positionally, I've made it very clear to our coaches that the first thing we ask is everybody healthy and safe? Okay, make sure that's first and foremost, and it's paramount importance, obviously. The second issue is there anything on the home front that we could be of help with? Because you're not only going to have the health and safety issue, but now given how many shutdowns there are, there's the potential now for, players, parents to be laid off. You've got some of those issues, and how does that impact financial aid? And, how do the kids now all of a sudden transition into different financial aid packages? And then after that, we just make sure the third question we ask is there any academic issues? One of the nice things that is still occurring is that even though it's done remotely, the Office of Student Enhancement and our advising office have both been very proactive in outreaching to myself about any kids having potential issues. And one of the main things that we've made very clear to our kids is that those resources are also still there. So if you need, to reach out to an academic advisor, that person is still there to help you. So Alex Espana, who our kids deal with mostly, he is still there, willing and able to help. Jessica DePaulo in Student Enhancement Services in her office is still there, and can still help. And, I send out a weekly letter on top of everything else. And one of the things to the team, and one of the things that I'm trying to give some, reassurances to, is that, we're still here to help. And so I always have a paragraph in there that we're still available. It may not be as easy as walking by my office and sticking your head in the door. Okay, but we're still here. And we're still here to help, to be of assistance. Things are crazy, and we recognize some of the challenges, and our administrative people, Peter Pillen and his group recognize some of the challenges and some of the things that we've had to do because of all the things that have happened. And just think about, your full aid candidates who are student athletes and what you have to do to try to help, on the nutritional front, for example, because they don't have access to the cafeterias and all you could eat and all these other issues. And so there's a bevy of things, but we start off all these Zoom positional meetings with making sure that we have an assessment of the kid, the family, and academically, is there any issues before we ever talk about football? And I think that's absolutely the way it should be, moving forward. And I want to make sure that our kids understand that we're here in a broader scope than just being a football coach.
That support system is so important, as you just mentioned.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just as critical as the preparation and making sure that the football schedule stays in line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Because again, when you think about it from a student athlete's perspective, their responsibilities, their workload has not radically changed. So they may be taking classes online, but they're physically still sitting there for 55 minutes. Still have to take notes, still have to have reading assignments, still have to do papers, still have to take tests. They still have off-season program that they have to do and find creative ways to do it. So there's a whole series of issues that nobody has had to deal with. Never mind if God forbid, mom or dad or grandfather, grandmother comes down with the virus. Never mind the trauma if somebody, is laid off due to the economic ramifications that this thing is now presented. And now these kids, need some guidance on what do you do? What do you do to seek help in financial aid? Because the package needs to be changed. What do you do, to be creative in terms of how do I get a workout in when I don't have access to a gym? I don't have access to a squat rack. And so kudos to lots of people of being there and being creative. And, as I mentioned earlier, it's people pushing cars as opposed to prowlers. Yeah. It's people box jumping on walls as opposed to, in the weight room. It's people lifting up 5 gallons of water jugs, as opposed to dumbbells. It's doing all these, what we would call crazy things once upon a time, but they're probably pretty routine things right about now, just to make sure that they can develop to the greatest degree they can.
Whatever you can get your hands on, whatever you have access to. That's the name of the game.
Absolutely.
Something tells me the highlight reel for the offseason is going to be a lot more interesting than in previous offseasons, Coach, based on what you just described. Well, once you do get through the offseason, the other remaining question is, and this is clearly a popular question that we receive from the audience, is the timeline to actually get back on the field and perhaps what that means for the upcoming season. So what have you at least heard at this stage? What conversations have been held with respect to trying to start things up as has at least been laid out for September?
Yeah, well, there's been all different information that we've, had access to. I'm the chair of the football coaches, so it's my turn again for somehow, but so I'm chair.
You never get a break.
No. So we've had a head coaches call last week. I wanted to get an accurate appraisal of what was going on everybody's campus in terms of what people were doing, what people were thinking, what was going on in terms of summer programs, what was going on in terms of summer camps, what's the latest in terms of presidential voice with everything, any different admission stuff. So we've had the coaches that we've had access to. All the head coaches at Columbia have had access on a fairly regular basis with each other and with Peter Pillen, who's joined us last week and will continue to join us moving forward to kind of give us some landscape of what is going on specifically at Columbia. A couple of our head coaches, and particularly Tony Reno at Yale is on a couple national committees. So he's been able to report on what's going on a national level. And so I can summarize in a variety of different capacities. So let me start off with the national landscape. There seems to be three different, things that people are, kicking around. I think obviously the one we all would want is we start things on schedule. And one of the challenges of starting things on schedule is you not only need a start date for the season, but then you have to kind of back up that date because there's a medical aspect of making sure that your kids, are conditioned correctly, have made the transition, from shorts and T-shirts effectively through the summer before we ever have full contact and everything else. So it's been bantered that some to as low as 30 days you may need to do that, to as high as 60 days. People medically are still trying to figure that date out. So if you do go with business as usual, then you would have to get that start date with the first date of the season and then back it off by 30, 45, on the high end 60, which personally I think is I think certainly above and beyond what we need. So that's model number one. That's what we're all shooting for. If you kind of look at some of the recent developments, we're a little bit more encouraged. The NBA is talking about going back, which would include, practices. It would include, trying to get their season started. Major League Baseball just came out with a blueprint to try to get theirs started in June. It may not look the same, but at least it's starting to get the ball rolling to get things back. Professional golf has come out with the first 2 to 3 weeks of no spectators and then transition into spectators. So to me, these are all really positive signs. And so hopefully it's model one. Model two is to start the season later. So in our case, we've already start later. So it would then be the question of, is it when we historically start, which is usually the third week in September, and now the NCAA model moves to that, which would buy us, probably another month to kind of get this thing in the rear view mirror when you're talking about right across the landscape of collegiate football. So, for us, that may or may not make sense. We can keep it to 19th and I think be okay. But from a league perspective, we've also talked about pushing that date back potentially and going to a 7-game Ivy League only to crown an Ivy League champion. So again, if that means we have to push the non-league games aside and gain 2 or 3 more weeks to get people more comfortable, then that's great. And then the third thing that people have bantered is a spring season. And the spring season will only come if all of a sudden now nobody is comfortable allowing human beings back on campus. So if they're saying the fall semester is going to be virtual in nature and they're going to online learning and continuation of the spring semester, they've already made that decision for the summer, which I think we all agree with. So all summer school classes, any of those high school transitional courses that people take and classes that they take is all virtual learning right now. But if they do declare that the fall is now going to be virtual, then obviously it's going to lead to really some interesting things that happen with the potential for kids to defer for the fall and start this, it gets a little tricky. But that's the third model that's been bantered about as well. So the admissions people meet in early May. The presidents meet in the middle of May. Hopefully by then, our medical people, the scientists, the government, the state government will give us a little bit more clarity along with the city and the institution, and we'll have a little bit better idea. I remain very optimistic and hopeful that it's business as usual, that our kids will be able to get back on campus, hopefully somewhere in that August timeframe, and then we proceed. But obviously nobody has a crystal ball, so there's no way to guarantee that. Finally, the last, positive bit of news has been there's been a push within our own league, and it's been the president at Brown University has kind of come through saying, they have a very strong preference to try to do everything they can to get students back on campus in the fall. So I think it's not only coming from other places. I've heard the same thing from the president of Purdue and some other schools, but it's also nice when it's coming in from one of the 8 schools, in our league. So this is what we're all trying to process, and then we're all trying to guide, kids, because again, if all of a sudden we're shut down in the fall, if kids start school, and we'll talk about our incoming class, they'll start school, what happens to their eligibility clock? Does it start even though we don't have football? And since we do not have a 5th-year, availability to kids to go to graduate school, how do we guide those kids? Do we say, okay, report not this year, take, a transitional year and report next year? And what does that do to your numbers? And then what do you do if you do have football in the spring? How do you prepare? They're talking about a February season. You have to have spring football before you start the season. You have spring football in the fall. And there's a whole series of issues that are very complex that everybody has to work on. And it's the same within our league, but it'll be interesting. But I think it also going to get predicated upon, are there human beings, not just athletes, but students safely on everybody's campus? If the answer is yes, then I think we're going to proceed in the fall in some capacity.
As
And it was
you noted,
long-winded, but I was trying to give you all the variables.
no, and we certainly appreciate the intel, Coach. I think what you pretty much laid out also is it's a domino effect, because once one thing is impacted, it certainly then, to your point, impacts everything else that follows, essentially.
Yeah, and again, I've been encouraged in the last week, just because the professional sports, where it all starts, and then it trickles down from the pros, the colleges, the high schools. They've taken a little bit more aggressive stance about trying to establish a start date within a season. So whether it was the basketball that's already been playing, or it's baseball that needs to start playing, at least they've made, some statements about, this is the blueprint. This is what we're looking to do. And then we're going to have to get somewhat creative to how to implement it, but it's moving forward with at least the season, which I think is a very, very encouraging sign. And then hopefully, as this thing, subsides and we get a much better handle on it, then we improve all the metrics that need to be improved to get everybody back safely, then I think we can take, I think some confidence away that we're going to do something in the fall. Hopefully it's a full season, but we're prepared to a shortened season if we have to go in that route.
Now, when you brought up that timeline in terms of it's not so much starting the season, it's a matter of also having the players out on the field to get conditioned. Right. What in your mind is the minimum that you think you would need to get a team up and running? Yeah,
I think most coaches feel comfortable with 30 days. Once upon a time, you never had access to the kids over the summer. Once upon a time, they weren't spending, the entire summer on campus with strength coaches and everything else. Now, you have to kind of go back into, the 90s and early 2000s before it became really prevalent. So you have to have some confidence in your kids being able to do the workout and at least being in some semblance of physical cardiovascular condition and doing the best they can with the strength program. And again, you get a little bit more encouraged as you see some states are opening up and allowing people now to get back into gyms, so that will help in the transition. So, I'm confident that the football things that you missed, whether it was the drills, whether it was the 11-on-11 or the 7-on-7 or the inner squad, those are the things that you need to get back into place so you have some confidence that your kids are going into week one physically prepared, in football shape, which is different than regular cardiovascular shape, and feel confident and prepared that they can put their best foot forward. So, I think we'll get there. Again, I'm an optimist by nature, but I see enough signs pointing in the right direction that, I feel pretty certain, and I'm always encouraging our kids that when the smoke clears and we get back to whatever our new degree of normalcy is going to be, that we're prepared and we've taken all the steps to hit the ground running so we can transition as quickly as possible. But 30 days should be plenty.
All right. Well, before we wrap up, we have another popular question that has been submitted by several audience members, and they've asked about the new NCAA transfer rule. How concerned are you about the impact of the NCAA's new transfer rule on Columbia in particular, as well as the Ivy League overall?
Yeah, I think you can lump Columbia and you can lump the Ivy League together because the transfer portal, which started a couple of years ago, is very popular. And it's ridiculously easy to enter a portal, which then effectively makes you available to every institution out there. And so transferring from a student athlete's perspective has never been easier. So once upon a time, you used to have to get permission. You used to have to reach out to certain schools and contact the compliance office to get permission before you could have any dialogue. So it was a much more cumbersome process. Now you just go to fill out a form in your compliance, and now you have access to everybody. Now, one of the issues in the Ivy League is that fifth year dilemma. Our kids can only recapture a ninth semester if there's a medical or a personal issue that caused it. So a kid had knee surgery, missed the season, he's eligible to recapture a ninth semester. There were some issues on the home front. The kid had to leave and had to address those issues. Given all the things that are happening these days, he'll be able to recapture that ninth semester. But typically what happens is an incoming freshman may not be ready for everything that's thrown at him. So the adjustment to being potentially 3,000 miles away from home, the adjustments to a whole different academic approach, adjustment to being in a dorm with a roommate, an adjustment, to a new football, to all the different terminology, to new scheduling. And so that kid may not accelerate, his on the field progress as much as you want, so he doesn't play. It's not that he's medically hurt, but he just doesn't play. Now that kid, you fast forward it to his senior year, he in theory, after his senior year is completed, he still can recapture that year someplace else because everybody else is on a 5-year model. The Ivy League's on a 4-year model. So if you look at our team this year, we probably had 5 to 10 kids enter the transfer portal, all of which did not have significant contributions as freshmen, turned out to be good players during specifically their junior and senior years, but still had a year left and now can hopefully parlay that year left into going to graduate school somewhere and getting a graduate degree and completing their 5th year of eligibility. And if you kind of just look in the rearview mirror, we were like the place to go if you were a kicker. We had, Cam and Matt go to Georgia and Vanderbilt. We had Parker go to, Parker go to Vanderbilt, Cam went to Kentucky. I went to Georgia and Matt went to Kentucky. This past year, we had players at Tulane, for example. So our whole league is feeling the effects of this, but it's not Columbia specific. It's our league and how we define what a playing tenure is. It's 8 semesters, and you only get a 9th semester if there's a medical or personal reason to do so.
And basketball,
does that answer the question?
That 100% does. I was going to say basketball faces similar challenges too. The same thing in terms of
they're the exact same thing. Yeah, they're in the exact same thing. And again, it's easier for our kids to recapture a 9th semester because then they only have to take the spring semester of the senior year off and they come back. It gets a little trickier if you're a spring sport athlete, because of the time involved and where you have to take everything off. So it's getting tricky. And again, with the transfer portal making things so convenient for everybody, it's uncharted territory for a lot of places. And we actually spend time as a staff, and one of our administrative guys has this, where he combs every day the transfer portal to see if there's anybody that is there that could make some sense in terms of we should be looking at, or they may have interest in us.
Well, before we have Mike take over, Coach, I just wanted to thank you for all the time and insight, and congratulations on setting the new record, I'm told, for the most Zoom meetings by a Columbia football coach in one day. Hats off to you for that.
I want to thank everybody for joining us, obviously from my family and our family to everybody. Hopefully everybody is safe and healthy. And again, and I'm speaking to parents and alumni, we're here if we could be of any help. So please do not hesitate to reach out. It's a message that we've been constantly trying to address with your sons. So we're here, we're available, we're willing, and thank you for all that you do. And together we'll kind of get through this. So again, thank you and stay safe.
Absolutely. Well said.
Coach
Mike,
Lance,
we'll hand it off to you.
thank you very much for
Thanks, guys.
being a part of this. We had about 140 people join on the call. This was outstanding. Thank you for your insight on the current program. Special thanks to my staff, the football staff who have helped us put this on, along with our development staff. So with that, we will end this meeting and hope to hear from everybody in the coming weeks. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a
Appreciate
lot.
you being here. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for organizing this. Lance, always good to talk to you.
Same here, Coach. Appreciate it.
Take care,
Mike,
bud.
thank you.
See you.